In 1945, President Truman sent General George Marshall to urge Chiang Kai-shek to take the communists into a coalition government in China. Chiang refused. However, a temporary truce and an arms embargo were effected by General Marshall. Soon after the embargo went into effect, the Chinese Reds, supplied by the Russians with excellent equipment from Manchuria, moved into action again. This tragic turn of events in China raised questions by congressional leaders. And in the summer of 1947, General Albert C. Wedemeyer was sent to China to determine whether the United States should rescind its embargo and send supplies to Chiang's forces. Wedemeyer's report, withheld from Congress and the American public by presidential order, stated that with aid, the nationalist forces could prevent China's fall to the communists. It was 9 years after the communist takeover of China when General Wedemeyer's report was finally published. However, in 1949, the fall of China to the Reds aroused some political personages who spoke out critically. Among them, Congressman John F. Kennedy of Massachusetts, who said, "Over these past few days, we have learned the extent of the disasters befalling China and the United States. Our policy in China has reaped the whirlwind. The continued insistence that aid would not be forthcoming unless a coalition government with the communists was formed was a crippling blow to the nationalist government." This statement was reported in the February 21, 1949 Congressional Record. President Kennedy must not forget those words. A report on a subsequent investigation by the United States Senate read,
"The Judiciary Committee, in the report it has just issued, finds a conspiracy, communist-inspired, that led to American defeat. High American officials were duped. Policies were influenced that gave the communists their greatest victory."
In the years following the Chinese nationalists' defeat, the Reds have strengthened and consolidated their hold. Poor farmers who owned a few acres of land and objected to communist collectivization and the breakup of their families were liquidated. The dead, more than 20 million. The Chinese call it seomei, which means deprived of existence. At the end of World War II, Soviet troops occupied North Korea to disarm surrendered Japanese forces. By 1948, the Soviet Union had created a new satellite out of North Korea. Over 2,000 Soviet Koreans, Communist Party members from Korean communities in Russian territory, had been placed in control of North Korea. Buttressing these political experts were Soviet and Chinese military advisors and 22,000 Korean troops trained by the Chinese army. On June 25, 1950, the Communists launched a full-scale invasion of South Korea. American commanders who served in Korea during the fighting returned home bitter and deeply disturbed. To congressional committees, our commanding generals in Korea testified. Mark Clark said, "I was not allowed to bomb the numerous bridges that were across the Yalu River and over which the enemy constantly poured his trucks and his munitions and his killers." Stratemeyer, "You get in war to win it. You do not get in war to stand still and lose it, and we were required to lose it. We were not permitted to win." MacArthur stated, "Such a limitation upon the utilization of available military force to repel an enemy attack has no precedent either in our own history or, so far as I know, in the history of the world." It was a costly war. 54,264 Americans sacrificed their lives. Additional casualties numbered 103,284. A bitter price to pay for losing a war. This pattern of unprovoked aggression was continued by the Chinese Reds throughout Asia. In 1959, their Russian-supplied army overthrew the independent self-governing nation of Tibet. Persecution of the strongly anti-communist Buddhist priests inflamed the devout Tibetans to revolt. This was brutally suppressed by the Chinese Red Army. The religious leader, the Dalai Lama, and thousands of his devoted followers fled to sanctuary in India rather than submit to communist tyranny. To the southeast of Tibet, in Vietnam, the communist Ho Chi Minh masqueraded as leader of the Vietnamese nationalist movement. The French agreed to recognition of the new state, and Ho pledged them his loyal cooperation. However, within 2 months, Ho's forces launched a surprise attack on the French and plunged Vietnam into a war that has cost more than 60,000 casualties and left over 2 million homeless. By 1962, the United States was deeply involved as the struggle spread to South Vietnam. In neighboring Laos, U.S.-trained and equipped Laotian troops have fought a 10-year shadow war against Viet Minh communist invaders. Important as a military backdoor, Laos is the gateway to Thailand and Burma and conquest of Southeast Asia. International communism has a heavy stake in each of these invasions. The 600 million people of communist China are desperately in need of food, and Mao's forced industrialization program is badly in need of raw materials. In Indonesia, communist-supported President Sukarno threatens and reaches for more territory at the expense of the Dutch in New Guinea. International communism has established important beachheads not only in Europe and Asia, but also in the Middle East and Africa. In nearly every part of the world, they have instigated nationalistic revolts, student riots, assassinations, political unrest, and civil strife. The extent of infiltration and subversion by Kremlin agents in Latin America has been demonstrated in Mexico, El Salvador, Chile, Ecuador, Guatemala, Venezuela, as well as other Latin American countries. Early in 1948, Bogota, Colombia was the scene of a significant demonstration of communism in action. Dr. George Gaitan, popular liberal leader and idol of the Colombian masses, was assassinated. In an attempt to disrupt the 1948 Inter-American Conference and discredit the Colombian government, a well-plotted uprising was touched off by Red agents. They claimed that the Colombian president was responsible for Gaitan's death. Communist-led workers and students seized Bogota radio stations and attacked the Palace of Justice. In all, more than 136 buildings worth over $21 million were destroyed before police subdued the mob. The Colombian National Police have in their files evidence and testimony linking Fidel Castro with the Bogota assassination and riots, and identifying him as a communist agent. Yet warnings as early as 1958 that Fidel Castro was a communist, or a long-time willing tool of world communism, fell on deaf ears in the United States. Instead, leading American news media jumped blindly on the Castro bandwagon, portraying him as a romantic rebel, a Robin Hood, leading a fight for social justice. The pro-Castro atmosphere that resulted brought about withdrawal of military aid to the anti-communist Batista government. Again, as with the fall of China, the United States ordered an embargo at a crucial point in the Cuban revolt. However, Castro's agents in Florida were able to obtain great volumes of fighting equipment, purchased mostly with communist-supplied funds. Millions of dollars from Russian and Chinese subsidies were channeled through secret groups in several Latin American countries. Nathaniel Weil's well-documented book, Red Star Over Cuba, gives details of this, including the quote from Stanley Ross, editor of El Diario de Nueva York, who wrote that Castro bought entire regiments from Batista's officers and on one occasion purchased for $650,000 cash an entire armored train complete with tanks, guns, ammunition, jeeps, and 600 men.